Oh yeah, we're sitting outside at the dunk. I don't know what got me thinking about this exactly, but I sort of think of there as being two theories of evil that people have in the world, broadly speaking. I think it was just memories of working fast food. Obviously, just get me thinking about the question of evil. If you've never dealt with the general public, perhaps this wouldn't intuitively feel like a question you would associate with fast food. I think we could kind of call the two theories of evil the Judeo-Christian theory of evil, or the Abrahamic view of evil, and the Buddhist, East Asian view of evil. Actually, I don't really know what Confucius thought about evil per se, but let's just call it the Buddhist theory of evil. I think the reason these two categories are useful is it's actually bigger than that. It's not just like Christians think this and Buddhists think this. I think these are like the two ways of thinking about evil. Some more caffeine for this one. So I think the right way of thinking about what we could call the Judeo-Christian view of evil is that some people are inherently evil, and everybody has a certain amount of evil or has some evil tendencies or something like that. It's kind of this idea that the individual has this quality and that's just a thing. Like, it doesn't matter how much you examine it or rationalize it, it's just there. People just have tendencies to do bad things or immoral things. In contrast, what we could kind of call the Buddhist view, it's larger than that, but we'll just call it that, is the idea that while this is true, most people do wrong things or bad things, or however you want to say it. Most people do those things because of their own ignorance or their lack of wisdom, however you want to say it. It's the idea that evil is mostly ignorance. And see, like, the question that I'm kind of approaching to these two theories is like, okay, which of these is better? Maybe that's just how my brain is wired, but that's kind of what I naturally wonder. As I've said in previous videos, I'm an ordained minister. You know where I'm naturally inclined to come from. But it's like you kind of have to give the Buddhist view some credit, because when you actually think about how life works, everybody has at least the opportunity to get better. And I mean, this is in Christianity. Obviously, the idea that you can be made to understand why things are wrong is a very Christian idea. So it's in there. But what we're calling the Buddhist view kind of focuses on that more. I would say, as somebody who's read the Bible a whole bunch of times and is very thorough, has a pretty thorough understanding of it, I would say that there are kind of two ideas in Christianity when it comes to realizing your sin, basically. You know, there's definitely the divine revelation thing where God is like showing you, he's putting conviction in your heart about what you've done wrong. But there also is very much this idea of like, you're just growing in wisdom and you look back and you're like, oh, I was an idiot. So, you know, you've got both of those, but I guess then in contrast, the Buddhist view is more like it's all growing in wisdom versus like some divine thing. So yeah, it's like, which one of these comports more with reality? Which one fits with how the world actually is more? I like how there are just people going through the drive-thru right here. So I think where I land on this issue is thus: if we're just rolling with the idea that most evil, most iniquity, most flaws, let's say, if we're rolling with the idea that the biggest flaw in humanity is ignorance, I think that's like 80% true. We have a great example in our society today. One of the purposes of tradition is to pass on wisdom. Now, obviously, tradition isn't right necessarily about everything, but it's just what previous generations have learned and tried to pass down to their descendants. And we now live in a modern world that has thrown away most tradition. on some occasions for good reasons, but obviously there's a lot of baby in that bathwater. You know, at least in the US, something like 19% of high school graduates can't even read. So at the very least, we have a massive coincidence of ignorance, massive ignorance, and quite a bit of immorality. I don't think that's a spurious correlation. So that kind of makes you think that, like, okay, maybe evil just is ignorance. So then we look at which cultures or societies have kind of taken this idea the most seriously. Obviously, what we're sort of colloquially calling the Buddhist view of evil, most taken seriously in East Asia. Now, in a lot of ways, these cultures are some of the best on earth. You know, Japan has like almost no crime. So I'm not really using this as an opportunity to talk crap about any country or society or whatever, but it is worth noting that almost all of the biggest atrocities in human history happened in East Asia. You know, like the Japanese conquest of Manchuria, the Boxer Rebellion, there's a whole bunch of them. In fact, there's a good Wikipedia article called Biggest Man-Made Disasters by Death Count or something like that. And you'll notice that if you take the top 10, like at least half of them happen in East Asia. So it kind of makes you think like maybe they're mostly right, but there's some important things that they're really missing. If you're viewing evil as something that's inherent in all people, that includes authorities and kings and emperors and stuff. And so if you're taking that idea seriously in a deep cultural way, then you come to expect that even from the most powerful people in society. See, like in Europe, medieval Europe, even though kings had all this power, there was this idea that even the king was subservient ultimately to God. Needless to say, a lot of these kings did plenty of atrocious things, but there was this idea that there is a higher standard than just the king. So yeah, to me, that's kind of the dividing line. I think the idea that evil is ignorance is true 80% of the time with most people, especially common, everyday people. But it's really useful to understand that, first of all, there are just people who are psychopaths. They're just born completely evil. Most people are pretty decent. Most people, if you raise them in a decent way and give them wisdom and teach them and stuff, they are going to turn out pretty okay. But there's a certain kind of person that can have all the facts. There can be a person who pretty much understands everything they need to understand and can be told everything and is still just going to do evil, horrible things. Some people just want to watch the world burn. I saw a child once playing with a ruby the size of a tangerine. Oh yeah, before we go, there's one last thing I kind of wanted to say about that kind of person. So like, I said the ignorance theory of evil maybe applies to like 80% of people. It's probably more than that. But, you know, that tiny minority of super genuinely evil people, it might be more important to recognize those people because they can just do an outsized amount of damage. All it takes is one Ted Bundy and 30, 40 people are murdered. So maybe that's why this is a little bit of an eternal question. It's hard to know whether the more banal, common forms of evil are worse than the extreme exceptions, because the exceptions can matter a whole lot. Man, there's just something about this Dunkin'. It gets me thinking philosophically. You know, now that I'm thinking about it, I kind of know another reason why the question of evil popped into my head. One of the last things I watched before I went to sleep last night, there's this viral video of some woman who drives her car into some parking lot or something, and she shoves this little dog out the door and just says bye-bye. This was caught on some security camera. She just takes this little black and white dog, looks like maybe a Chihuahua mix or something, puts it outside of the car and says bye-bye, shuts the door, and drives off. Just abandons this little dog in the middle of nowhere. It's just like one of the most I don't even know how to describe it. One of the most just casually evil things I've ever seen. Because this dog, you can tell that it thinks it's going on a walk or something. Like, obviously, when you take a dog on a walk, you like put it outside the car, and then he's all excited. So this dog is like looking around and is like, yeah, we're going on a walk. But then he kind of like looks for the woman, and she's not there, and he sees the car driving off and starts to go after the car. And then he realizes he can't catch up with the car, and he's just like super afraid. There's just something about doing that to a helpless little dog. It's one thing if you're like doing something bad to somebody who's powerful or something like that. It's another thing when you have this thing that's completely dependent on you and just loves you, and you do something evil to that. It's like, what? That's not an ignorance thing. That's just like, you're just an evil person. So yeah, it was weirdly impactful on me for what it was. Definitely got me thinking about the nature of evil.